Well, hello, everyone. I want to say thank you all for taking the time to come talk with me today, and I'll share a little bit about why I asked you to be here. It was important for me to reach out. I wanted, in law enforcement, in the Newport News Police Department, as the chief here, I think it's very, very important for what we do with our community and our interaction. The open communication we have, being as open and transparent as we possibly can, and to address issues when they come up, or oftentimes even before they come up, or certainly in a timely manner. And that's what I wanted to try to do today. Late Tuesday night, I was notified of a use of force incident and arrest that had taken place in the city's southeast community. I was able to see that video late Tuesday night, so it was late. I made some phone calls, asked for some information, and then the first thing I did when I came into work yesterday morning on Wednesday was to meet with the assistant chiefs. Following that meeting, I brought in the supervisors of the officers that were involved in this use of force incident, this arrest. I then spoke with our training division. I wanted some clarity and some information on tactics that we use, how we train our officers. After that meeting, I reviewed the body-worn camera footage that our officers had on during the incident. And then I ended the day, Wednesday, with meeting with the officers that were involved in this use of force incident. And I just wanted to hear from them, their perspective, and just have a conversation. Now, or I guess I should say in a time frame from late Tuesday night till even just before coming in here to speak with you all, there's been several emails that have come through, maybe a handful, but several posts and questions. And sometimes individuals, when they see things, the perception, and when I saw the video myself, I can see and understand concerns that the community has and some things that were being said. I can understand that. But I think it's important to put content and narrative and to try to be open and transparent. So my plan today, because it's so important to me that we connect, the number one factor that we have in policing is a community relationship. It's our foundation, right? Community policing, how we interact with our citizens, talking with them. So I am thankful for citizens who called and asked or emailed or sent in text messages about, Chief, we're frustrated with this, or we saw this video, can you tell us a little bit more about it? Can you talk to us about it? I think that's important. And I thank you. I welcome those conversations. And I understand some that have been more aggressive and upset, and how could this happen? And in seeing the video from the angles that I have seen from the citizens capturing, I can understand some of those concerns. And they're legit, I understand that. But what I want to do today is talk to you factually about what happened in this incident and where we are today, okay? So I've laid out who I met with yesterday. And I'm just being frank with you. One of the conversations I had from a citizen is, Chief, we needed to hear from you yesterday. Well, the reason I waited until today is I wanted to spend some time myself looking into the situation, to gathering facts, having conversations, reviewing our own body-worn camera footage, and then talking to the officers, talking with the instructors. The last thing I wanted is people to ask questions. Let me look into that. I don't know. I'll get back to you. I wanted to try to bring as much forward as I can, so I needed some time to look at it myself. So I've asked you all to be here today to share with you a little bit about what happened Tuesday night. So Tuesday night around 9 o'clock, officers, detectives were in the area around the 2500 block of Roanoke Street. A vehicle passes them or drives by. Now, it's not street racing, but it drives by at a faster rate of speed, accelerated speed. It draws the officers, detectives' eye, that catches their eye, and they run the license plate. That license plate does not match the vehicle that it's on. It belongs on another type of vehicle. So the officers, in fact, do a traffic stop. The vehicle, I just want to make sure I get the right location for you. The vehicle pulls over around 30th and Roanoke Street. The officers, detectives park their vehicle, and as they park the vehicle, they see the individual, one individual inside the vehicle that stopped. They see the individual lean over to his right, and they lose sight of him altogether, lean over to his right into the passenger side of the vehicle, and then pop back up. So they note that, they both see that, and the officers approach the vehicle, one on the driver's side and one on the passenger side. The detective that approaches on the driver's side begins a conversation with Mr. Lawrence. I want to make sure I pronounce his name right, Mr. Lawrence Fenner. He's a 31-year-old adult male. He has a conversation with Mr. Fenner about the license plate and asks him, does he have a driver's license? And can you show us your registration? He tells him that he is licensed, but he doesn't have it with him, and looks for the registration in the glove box. He talks about that he did acknowledge that those plates don't belong in that car, that he had removed them from another, and it may not have cycled through the system yet, or he removed them, but he acknowledged that he had removed the plates, that they belonged to another vehicle. The officers then have about a 6-minute conversation with Mr. Fenner. They ask him multiple times to step out of the vehicle. Mr. Fenner was unwilling to do that. So this goes on about 6 minutes and 6 minutes and 30 seconds. They continue to ask him to step out of the vehicle for their safety, his and the community's. Now, we're trained that in the academy instruction. There's plenty of case law that kind of covers that, but that was the reason. Mr. Fenner was unwilling to do that, so much so that in that conversation, that's the cordial as that's going on, Mr. Fenner made a phone call. I'm not sure exactly the relationship to a significant other, and she tells him just comply with him, step out of the vehicle. The detectives told him that their intent was to check the area where he was sitting, what we would call a protective sweep in law enforcement, the area where he was sitting, or in the passenger side of the vehicle where he had leaned over, that there was no intent to search the whole vehicle. It was just to check that area for safety. They in fact told him that once he did that, if there was nothing there, he would be placed back in the vehicle. That conversation continues to go on, and he is still unwilling to do that. At this point, now a struggle begins. This is now the tugging and pulling of trying to remove someone from a vehicle. Now let me say this before we go any further. Anytime that law enforcement, that police use of force, it is not something that we look forward to. It does not look, it is one person's will against another. And we train that way of how to put people in restraints, how to make an effective arrest, how to place someone in handcuffs. And there are things, we'll talk about that a little bit as we get further on into this situation. So now we have the tugging back and forth. Mr. Fenner wraps hands around the steering wheel. His legs are locked inside the vehicle. He begins to scoot over towards the center of the vehicle. Even in fact, when he was on the phone conversation, he had kind of slid over, I guess, to the center console towards the passenger side. So as this continues to go on, other officers respond. There are 2 other officers, so there's a total of 4, and we're continuing to try to pull Mr. Fenner out of the vehicle. He's still unwilling to, and again, we're tussling, going back and forth. The officers at some point are able to get the passenger door open, and now they're able to pull him from the driver, the center part of the vehicle, through the passenger door. So as he's coming out, he asks, "Why are you arresting me? Why are you arresting me?" And the officer said, "Well, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice. We've asked you to step out. We told you we need you to step out, and you've been unwilling. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." The struggle continues now outside the vehicle. Officers one of the officers is actually pulled down by a grasp on his arm. You can hear in the body-worn camera video, "Let me go, let me go." In fact, there's a strike used to get the officer's arm free. And now on the ground, what I would describe as a wrestling match. It is not a boxing match. It's not a kicking match. It's not punching back and forth. It is officers trying to handcuff Mr. Fenner, giving him commands, place your hands behind your back, telling him what they're trying to do. This continues to go on. At some point, the officers are able to, I guess, at some point, the officers, as they continue to struggle, there's, and I want to make sure, because there's a couple posts that have come through that I want to try to, some misinformation that I want to try to address. I understand some of them, but I want to try to address them. So as this struggle is going on the ground, There's a lot of grabbing by officers and Mr. Fenner. Again, they're pulling, if you can visualize that, they're pulling back and forth. One of the officers is actually struck in the face with a headbutt. There's some pulling. You can hear officers tell him, let go, let go. They're unable to get him handcuffed. In doing so, they use a taser is pulled out and used as kind of a stun gun move, or what we call a placing the stun gun or the taser against his body. But as he moves, it rolls off. It's kind of up around his side and shoulder, but as he moves, it rolls off. It doesn't work. It's ineffective. The officers continue to struggle to get him handcuffed, and that doesn't work either. While they're continuing the struggle, there's one of the officers is grabbed around the throat area, one another around the vest. You can hear it, let go, and there's what we call a knee strike, right? So it's not a kicking motion. It's not like kicking a soccer ball. It is using the knee to, when I was a kid, it was kind of referred to as a Charlie horse in the side of your leg. It's what's called a compliance move. It is a taught tactic to have someone disengage, to have someone stop the struggling, to come into to be able to release their arms or to stop that fight and emotion. It's to try to gain control of the individual. But it is a taught measure. It's not a kicking motion. It is taking the knee and placing it usually in the center of the thigh, on the side of the thigh, or the upper hip area. Again, that was tried 2 or 3 times, and it did not work. We were still unable to get him into handcuffs or to make an arrest. At this point, he starts to push up and get up, and officers completely now back away. All 4 just back away, and the taser is deployed. 2 probes are fired, and it strikes Mr. Fenner. Mr. Fenner is on his back, and the officers give him commands. As the taser cycles it through, the officers give him commands to turn over, to roll over. That is, in fact, to place him in handcuffs. He starts to, officers move in to now place him in handcuffs, and he places his hands under his chest, which is extremely difficult to get to remove. And that's, other tactics can be used here again. Sometimes those knee strikes can be used to get you to free up your arms. But they weren't. At this point, there was a second taser deployment. Same taser, all it was recycled through again. There was not another taser fired. At this point, he did stop, and officers moved in and were able to place him in handcuffs. Now, through the whole conversation, as they're telling him he's under arrest, his body then, he continues talking, he continues breathing. You hear him say some things like, I'm having trouble breathing, get off of me. The officers then ask him to stand up, to remove him and to place him into a police vehicle. And he kind of just goes dead weight, right? He just stops. He won't move. Kind of like, I'm unwilling to stand up. I'm not going to move. So the officers carried him over to the police vehicle. As they try to put him in the police vehicle, he's unwilling to go in, stiffing in his legs, straightening his legs out. It becomes a little bit of a challenge to manipulate him, to get him inside the police vehicle. Finally, he is inside, and just like in any other individual that we would have an interaction with force on, we would get them medical treatment to make sure that they're okay, to check them out. He was taken about 6 blocks away, I want to make sure, to 23rd and Wickham. The officers drove about 45 seconds, took him to get there, where he was checked out by medics. We didn't bring medics into the scene because a crowd had started to gather, and for everyone's safety and to make sure he was treated, he was taken to the fire station there, the firehouse, and treated by medics and medically cleared. He was then taken down to lockup, where there he complained of soreness, and we then transported him ourselves. We transported him to the hospital, where he was there, treated, held for observation, observed, and released, and his charges were laid against him. He was charged with, just so I'm getting it accurate, he was charged with assault, obstruction of justice, a firearm by a convicted felon, a concealed weapon, and then, of course, the license plate issue. Now, let's go back to the vehicle. When the officers checked the vehicle, the same areas that they told Mr. Fenner that they would check, driver's side, the passenger side, because of the motion of leaning over, there was a 9mm firearm found under the front seat. That is the firearm that he was in fact charged with. My conversations with the officers, what did you see? They talked about their concern of the individual leaning over, Mr. Finner leaning over, going out of sight, and then popping back up. So he was asked to be removed. They asked him to step out of the vehicle for their concern for his safety, the officer's safety, and the community there, and his unwillingness to do so. Mr. Finner stated multiple times he didn't feel like they had the right to ask him to step out of the vehicle. He didn't feel that they had the right. He also asked them, do you have a search warrant? And they explained to him, we do have the right to ask you out. There's plenty of case law that covers that. Officers are trained that in our in-service, and our recruits are trained that. But they also explained to him, we don't have a search warrant, nor do we intend to search your vehicle. Only check the areas that courts have allowed for what we call a protective sweep, in areas that the individual can reach for. That is where we're at today. Now, starting, I guess, late Tuesday night and into Wednesday, this video on social media that some citizens have posted and some narration beside it, I can understand some concerns of citizens. I can understand, well, it looks like they're kicking that individual. The videos I saw from citizens are across the street in conversations like, oh, they're kicking that individual. This is just a normal traffic stop. They just ran up and pulled him out of the car. There were some posts about they had firearms drawn. There were posts about that he lost consciousness, that he wasn't conscious at all. That's why the officers had to carry him. Even some phone call conversations that I've talked with some citizens have discussed that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to meet today. Oftentimes we see in our society, when situations happen, that things can trigger things that you heard or saw or perceptions, and I wanted to try to address that. There were no firearms ever drawn in this situation. The only firearm that was recovered was the one under the passenger seat. Mr. Finner was tased. We talked about he never lost consciousness. He was asked to remove from the vehicle. He was asked to step out of the vehicle multiple times, and a conversation goes on, pretty cordial conversation for about a little over 6 minutes, about why they're asking him to step out of the vehicle, and centers around his motion, his movement, and some of his behavior where he was slid over in some of those actions. So that was the reason he was asked to move out of the vehicle. And they, in fact, told him, if there's nothing there, you will be placed back in the vehicle. But Mr. Finner repeated that he didn't feel like he had to step out of that vehicle. So the concerns that I wanted to point out today, I wanted to bring up, he was never kicked. There was never a foot ever came in contact, or he was never kicked, but there were 2 to 3 knee strikes on the right side of his body to try to get him to let go of the officers. And again, it wasn't a punching match and kicking, it was tugging and pulling and grabbing, right? So those strikes were to try to get him to let go of officers. And the strikes did what they in fact were put to do. It did release one of the officers that he had a hold of their outer carrier vest. So I just wanted to share some of that today. It's an unfortunate incident, and I will say again that there is no use of force that officers want to take part in. It's never, when we're trying to take someone into custody and they're unwilling to place their hands behind their back or surrender themselves, things happen. And I want to make sure that we're not mistreating citizens. I want to make sure that we're good to go with our tactics, the way we're training. When I look back at the officers, the moves that they used, the tactics that they used to get Mr. Finner in custody, were ones that we do that are in our policies and procedures of how we train. That knee strike is a trained tactic that we use for one of those very reasons, to disengage from someone, to get them to let go, to get them into handcuffs, and to get them to sort of comply and stop the act that they're doing. So it did release his grasp on one of the officers, and it is a trained tactic that we use. It's not outside our scope of how we train our officers. The traffic stop was reasonable. A traffic stop for a license plate that did not match that vehicle, and he in fact admitted to that he had removed the plates and maybe just hadn't switched over yet, but he wasn't sure, and it showed up on the computer screen when the officers ran it that it was another vehicle. His movement over to laying down or leaning over into the passenger seat did cause the officers some concern. I can understand that. But I also want to reiterate, I can understand the concern of the community. When we watched the video here, I had questions, and that is why I took the time to meet with the assistant chiefs, the officers involved, our training staff. I wanted to get as much information, review our own body-worn camera footage. But I did see some narration, and I understand some concerns. But I just want to reiterate, there was never he was never left at the fire station. One of the comments was that he was left there. We just dropped him off. That's not. He was taken there and treated. And then I also want to touch base on his family. His family came to the scene. They also came to the fire station. He was allowed to see his son. In fact, he was given a cigarette, talked to his mother and his wife at the fire station. There was cordial conversation between the officers, between Mr. Fenner and themselves at the hospital. One of the conversations was from Mr. Fenner himself. You did what you had to do, and I did what I had to do. He has been charged with the charges. We're going to send out a press release after this, kind of hitting what those charges are. But my point today is I understand the community's concerns. And that's the reason that I'm doing this, that I asked the media to come here. I ask you all, and I'm appreciative. Because I think it's important to have open conversations. And like I said, I've had a few phone calls. We've had a handful of emails that have come in just to have some conversations about what they saw, or I heard this, I saw this, can you explain this, why did this happen? And I wanted to share some of those things. I wanted to lay that out so that people had an understanding. But I certainly understand concerns about how we treat citizens, how we interact. And I also understand concerns that officers have in movement in vehicles and actions that will heighten their concern. And that's what was taking place here. And I wanted to share those. I just wanted to try to be factual with you on what occurred, that I understand concerns from the community. I understand the actions of the officers, the charges that were placed, the tactics that were used, the training that the officers receive. But it was not, and I wrote down just a couple of the posts that came out. It was not a traffic stop where individuals ran up and pulled someone from the vehicle and began an assault. That was not it at all. There was a good conversation asking him to step out of the vehicle. The conversation even explained why, of what they saw, and they would like him to step out of the vehicle. And if nothing was there, he would be placed back in the vehicle. There was a conversation about the license plate, but he was just unwilling to do that, and then things escalated from there. And anytime you try to remove someone from a vehicle, whether you're grabbing that steering wheel and locking your legs, it's very difficult. It's difficult, and it's not easy to watch or see if you're walking by, driving by, and seeing that. So I just wanted to try to put in some context, some content of what occurred, why it occurred, but I clearly want to say I understand perceptions of individuals that what they saw, and maybe not having a full understanding of what went on inside the vehicle, what was recovered from the vehicle, why the officers asked him to move out, to step out of the vehicle. On every traffic stop, we don't ask individuals to step out, but if there are some movement or some concerns or behavior that heightens that, we certainly have the ability to do that. Is there any questions that I can ask, or that you can ask that I can answer or touch base on?
Chief, so are you saying this was justified? Their actions were justified?
So their actions were all within our policy and procedures and guidelines. The officer's demeanor during and after, I believe, from what I see from the factual, from the body-worn camera video, we're gonna slow that down and look at it in depth. But after talking to him and looking at our tactics, what happened there is not what is narrated in some of these social media posts. It's not what's narrated in some of the posts and Facebook posts and emails. So the officers did act within department policy and guidelines. They followed the law, instructing someone to step out of the vehicle, even explaining to him why. Searching only the area that he had a reasonable grasp that he could reach or get to. All of those things, I believe that their actions were within department policy and guidelines.
Chief, he's charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, correct?
Yes, sir.
What is his felony record?
So I don't want to go into his criminal history. I don't want to put that out. But I did want to share with you what the charges were. He has been charged with those charges, but I don't want to, I'll leave that to you all to look up. I'm not trying to defame him in any way. I just wanted to share with what he was charged with.
So there was a total of 3 shots from the taser, is that correct?
So
One
there
that
was,
rolled off?
the term is drive stun. It's where you
Okay.
use it like a fashion stun gun where you place it against. But because there was still movement, and as it was placed, he rolled and it slipped off. So that didn't have any effect. So then there was the taser deployment where the cartridges, the probes, struck. That was effective to get him to stop the struggle. That stopped. And then when he was given direction to roll over, put your hands behind your back, that didn't happen. Officers moved in to try to do that, and as that started to occur, then he tensed up again and moved his hands under, so it was cycled again. There wasn't another taser gun deployed, it was the same taser that had another cycle. When that happened, he did stop and then was placed in handcuffs.
So it was the 3rd cycle that was effective?
The second cycle where the probes were in him.
Okay.
The first one was more tried of like a
Okay.
stun gun technique, a
Okay.
drive stun, but it didn't have effect. It rolled, it slipped right off.
All right. You had mentioned transparency at the outset of this
Yes,
press
sir.
conference.
Yes, sir.
Are you going to make available body cam video from your office?
So I looked at that. I want to go through that. I don't want to hurt the court case as we move forward. I think it's important, I have to balance that. And as the court case that I'm sure that the judge, the jury, are going to want to look at that. I don't want to taint anything, but I did think it was important to address some of the video and some of the screenshots that are out there. I want to be as transparent as I can, but my balance is not disrupting or hurting any of the court case as it goes forward. I will have conversations with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office about that. I want to certainly get their input. I am not opposed to releasing that, but I want to make sure it's done timely and at the right time. I don't want to discredit or hurt anything, so it may be something that we do at a later date after the court case. My point today was, it's a great question, but my point today was addressing some of the videos that were shot by citizens and some of the commentary that you hear. I saw 2, and both were sort of across the street, so I can understand. Oh, look, he's kicking, but those kicks are knee strikes. They're not foot to body. They are knee trained tactic that were to try to get to stop resisting, to stop the struggle, stop the wrestling match sort of that was going on. So it's something that could happen down the road. Yes, sir.
How many officer perspectives do you have? How many cameras?
3 of the 4. 3 of the 4.
4.
Yes, sir. And it's also the audio as well.
And are you asking any external agency to investigate this situation, or is it being handled internally?
No, we'll handle this internally. I'm comfortable with that. The facts are what the facts are. As I looked at it, again, from the conversations that I had yesterday, from the body-worn camera footage, talking with training, is this a trained tactic? We have the right to remove someone from a vehicle, going over what those case laws were and explaining why. I thought the officers laid out very clearly what their intent was, what they were asking Mr. Fenner to do to step out of the vehicle. Here's why, here's our concerns, and if there's nothing there, you'll be placed right back in the vehicle, and we're finished. But he was unwilling to do that, and at that point, we're kind of there. We can't just walk away from that. And then, like I said, we did recover a 9mm firearm underneath the front passenger seat.
Sir, I'm talking to his wife right now. She's watching this. She wants to know why these officers are not being reprimanded, and she also wants to know, in her words, why her husband was beat up. Can
So-
you respond, please?
So the officers reprimanded. I would explain to his wife. I'm assuming that was the individual he was talking to on the phone. Originally, the statement was, "Go ahead and do what they're asking you to do," and his response was, "I can't. I just can't do that. I'm not going to do that." And he told the officers that he wasn't going to come out of the vehicle. I don't believe that Mr. Fenner was beat up. I believe that officers had to react to his actions. If Mr. Fenner would have stepped out of that vehicle, we would have checked that vehicle and he would have been on his way. May have got a summons for the license plate, but he would have been on his way. His actions, by not getting out of the vehicle, even heightened the officer's concerns. And we have the right and the ability to make sure that officers are safe, his safety. Those actions, I believe, led to that struggle that occurred. I don't believe that Mr. Fenner was beat up. I believe that there was a struggle, I believe that he was tased, but no one set out to do that. There was wasn't just running up and doing that. It was responding to his actions that were taking place inside the vehicle. And the body-worn camera clearly shows that. There's no type of assault at all, or strikes inside the vehicle. It's just pulling and trying to get hands off the steering wheel, trying to remove legs that are wrapped around the center console, trying to get legs inside the vehicle as we try to put him into the police car. So I would disagree with him being beat up and the officers being reprimanded. But I will share this, that we will continue to look at it. I want to have some more conversation with our training division. You know, it's always, we try to look into what we do, how do we do it better. You know, there was good conversations, there was good demeanor in that conversations back and forth in the vehicle until we got to the point where, all right, now after six and a half minutes, we need you to step out. And he just made it very clear that he was unwilling to do that. And I wish that would not have occurred. But the officers responded to a traffic stop, or created a traffic stop because the license plate didn't belong in that car. So there was things there that sent us down a road, and his actions before and during really contributed to the struggle. If he would have placed his hands behind his back, there would have been no taser deployment whatsoever. So I guess that's the best answer I could give her. If she was sitting right here next to me, I would have the same conversation, and I would offer that. If she would like to come in and talk to me, I would be more than willing to talk to her about the situation, the incident.
Do you think, is it your belief that the reason he didn't get out of the car is because the gun that was underneath the seat?
You know, I want to stay with the facts. I don't know what was going through Mr. Finner's mind. I know the officers explained very clearly the only areas they wanted to check is where he was sitting in the passenger side. And if nothing was there, that he would be put back in the vehicle. And he, again, just stated that he was unwilling to do that. In fact, that he was not going to do that, and he refused to do so. His mindset on why he didn't want to get out of that vehicle, you know, I'm going to leave that up to a judge, jury, and the courts to decide. Is there?
Sarah, last thing, I'm gonna get you all connected because she would love to speak with you.
Absolutely.
So-
I can tell you, I think that is so important when we talk about transparency, right? This meeting or this conversation that we're having, if it creates a venue for us to sit down and I would love that, and I'm not opposed, you know, if me and Ms. Finner sit down together and showing her the body-worn camera footage that the officers have, the conversations and the words that are being said, and the statements that I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. That there are, it's just, I wish things would have been more. Yep, if you want me to step out, I'll step out. Check the vehicle that they have the right to do, right, and then we're finished. But he was just unwilling to do that, and it is not easy to look at, and I understand that. And if it was my wife, my significant other, I totally understand that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to sit down and have this conversation today. So absolutely.
Is he a Newport News resident?
You know what, I'm not exactly sure. I don't want to
Can we
give.
get a spelling on the name?
We're going to release all that
Oh, that'll be
in the
press
press release. We'll give you, yeah. We'll do that right after we finish here.
So they had the 6-minute conversation. At the point that it began to turn physical, where the struggle began, how long did that last?
You know, it goes on for a while. You see, there's the struggle back and forth inside the car, trying to pry a hand off the wheel and then one hand off, then the other. I will tell you, I applaud the officers. There's two things we talk about in training. We don't use the taser inside of a vehicle. You know, if somehow the vehicle would come into drive or move forward, we don't want that to happen. And you see in the body-worn camera of the police video that I believe it's his left arm is kind of braced against the side of the car. But as we're pulling and he is struggling and pulling back, they didn't want that arm to get injured there, and they let that go. So it goes back in the vehicle, and we were eventually able to get over into the passenger side. But we'll be putting a timeline together for you that has that. But the struggle inside the vehicle does take a while to get, as you can imagine, an individual who's about 6'2" to try to pull him out of the vehicle. But I would say somewhere around 5 or 6 minutes. 7 minutes. Yeah, I would say it took a while to remove it, and you can imagine it. Yes. Any other questions that I can address? Are we good? I want to thank you all for helping me out today. And again, I understand, I even had some phone calls late last night. I understand the community's concerns. I understand their, Chief, how did this happen and why? That's one of the things I'm trying to explain today. I want to be open and transparent as much as I possibly can, still holding the integrity of the case, but addressing concerns that individuals, when they see that video and they hear someone, there's voices narrating it, oh, they're doing this and he's unconscious, or is that a firearm? And I want to dispel that. I understand miscommunication. I understand misinformation will be out there. I understand that. And I think one of the ways to address that, as a matter of fact, the conversation I had last night is, Chief, I wish you would have done this sooner, and I understand that as well. But I also have a due diligence to find out for myself. That's why I wanted to talk to training, the assistant chiefs, the supervisors, and the officers themselves. I wanted to review that camera myself, that I could give some accurate information today and at least address the facts. So it means a lot. I appreciate you. You help us a lot with our message to the community, and that was my intent today. Okay? Thank you all.